Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, we discuss who really controls the internet and just how centralized and potentially vulnerable it's become. Plus, we've got the latest security letdowns from Windows 10 and the story of a questionably ethical hacker and Zomato's latest security breach. Plus your awesome feedback, a rockin' roundup, and so much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Welcome to TechSNAP, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems, network, and administration podcast. This episode was streamed live on May 31st, 2017, and is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, DigitalOcean, Ting, and iXsystems. My name is Wes, and joining us is our famous co-host. Yes, that's right. It's the one, the only, it's Dan. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Hello from the Great White North. I'm still in Ottawa.
Oh, look at you. You know, Ottawa, it's just fun to say. Is it as fun to be there?
It is, actually.
Awesome.
I do miss the quiet hometown I do live in that I used to be able to walk from home to the coffee shop and whatnot. But
oh, that's nice.
The coffee shop I want to walk to here is more than a few miles away.
Ooh.
And it is a walking area, but it's not walking like a, say, small town.
Right. You don't get that like quaint little, everything's kind of close, but you have like a stroll through a neighborhood to get there.
Yeah. Once you get to the Bridgehead Coffee Shop on Bank Street, it is a nice little neighborhood around there. For those that live in Ottawa, it's around Ossington. It's just over the Rita River going north from Riverside, just before you get to Sunnyside. So that's the area of Bridgehead that I've been working from most days. And it is a nice neighborhood to walk around there. It is very nice.
That sounds lovely. Anything else new in your side of the world there?
Did I say last night? Yes, in the previous show, did I say that I got my NS updates working?
You mentioned it briefly, but I don't think you had it working yet.
Yeah, it's working now. And then I created search.unixathome.org. I created a website.
Oh, fancy.
And actually got the first Let's Encrypt cycle working via DNS 01 validation. But I did have to do the DNS 01 validation by hand in order to get this first cert going.
But it should be automated after that, right?
Eventually.
Yeah.
So last night I got it I ran the Acme script, got a cert for search.unixathome.org, a request, and then it produced the .text file that I needed, and then I copy and pasted that into the zone files, checked them in TestVN, and then checked them out on the server. And that part was all automated. That was the only manual part, was the updating of the DNS. Everything else was automated through acme.sh.
Nice.
And once I had the cert, I then put up the website. And that website will then be used to publish all the certs that Let's Encrypt gives me. So all the clients just, every
just reference right there.
Every day or so, they fetch. It'll be on a delayed, so they're not all hitting the server at the same time.
Yeah, right. A splay there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. It sounds like you're having a lot of fun with Let's Encrypt, honestly.
It is interesting. I'm doing some things that I haven't tried before, and I'm trying to keep it automated so I never touch it.
Yeah.
And thinking of what things to monitor. And I'm sure. Pardon me. I'm sure I'm going to wind up doing this for work somewhere, so this all come in handy.
Yeah, it's a skill set. You build it now, you play with it now, and surely in the future. I mean, that's kind of the promise, right? It's like once you've got this down, you understand the ins and the outs, that it makes it really simple to go add encryption somewhere else down the line. And
I put the creation of search.unixathome.org in Ansible, so that all runs off Ansible now.
Yes.
Except for the cert. The cert itself has to be loaded up manually first, so the key always gets copied to the web server manually.
Okay.
And then when you get a new cert, you only publish the cert. You never publish the key.
Right. Yeah.
It's just an easier way of doing it.
That makes sense. Awesome. Well, that makes sense. We'll have to do once you get everything finalized. You come kind of to the end of this journey. I think it would make a great deep dive for the show.
It'll be a lot of fun to talk about that.
Awesome. I'll have to do some too. Maybe we can coordinate because I want to. I played with it a little bit, but really only on the
Yeah.
super easy, put it up on some droplets thing. I haven't dove deep into my own network infrastructure yet.
If you've only got one or two websites, you really just want to do it on each website,
Right.
custom just for that cert. But if you've got 20 or 30 websites and you want them, you don't want to be doing them.
Right. Once you're managing like an organization type situation.
Yeah, I didn't want to deploy 20 instances of scripts. I wanted just one.
Right. Yeah.
I'm still going to have scripts on each one, but it should be generic.
Awesome. All right. Well,
we'll see.
I'm excited to hear more and see how that story develops. Let's jump right into our main segment today. First up, we've got a very interesting story about who controls the internet, analyzing global threats using property traversal graphs. I'll just say it right now. I'm kind of a graph nerd. I like graphs. They're a lot of fun. But tell us more about what's going on in this interesting paper.
Well, traditionally, when you talk about who controls the internet, you start to think about government resources and stuff like that, or ISPs, and you don't really think about hosting environments and bandwidth providers. But much like a lot of companies tend to buy up many different newspapers or many different TV stations so they control all the media that you see, what's to stop a company from buying all the bandwidth and just eventually holding a near monopoly on the bandwidth and then deciding, hey, we don't want this going through, so we're just going to start blocking it. That's not really what they're getting at here, but it is something I started thinking about it while reading all this. So they started off with who controls the internet, how much influence do they have, and what would happen if one of those parties launched an attack or was compromised and was then used to launch an attack. So previous works have looked at individual core services, but this paper focuses on their interdependencies along attack propagation paths.
Say that 3 times.
Yeah. Do you know what an attack propagation path is? I'm not really sure.
I couldn't define it precisely, but I imagine the route the attack takes as you jump from host to host or whatever.
Yeah, that sounds like a likely explanation. So, what type of attacks are they talking about? There's 3 large-scale incidents that got them to thinking about this. One was the Canon DDoS attack in 2015, which was caused by malicious JavaScript code injected into TCP connections crossing Chinese network borders.
Oh.
I don't remember that.
I don't either, but it sounds fascinating.
Yep. The injected code aggressively requested resources from the DDoS targets. Then there was the PRISM program in 2013. This was an NSA surveillance program with direct access to internet communications and stored information. And they talk about, while the direct involvement of popular tech providers is still unclear, in this paper we make the assumption that establishing this type of collaboration is possible and can be voluntary or coerced by authorities by means of law and court orders. So yeah, if NSA has all these hooks, let's just assume it's the NSA, has all these hooks into all these different providers, and somehow the NSA winds up with malware in it, and it goes out through all these hooks that they have, suddenly that gives this malware access to huge swaths of the internet. Just bang, there you go. It's not like they have to start in one place and go from one to the next. They have inroads into the inner workings of all these ISPs. So this third item is one that we've talked about before. It was the DDoS attack against Dyn.com in October last year. The attack caused customers, including Amazon, Netflix, Twitter, Reddit, and Spotify, to have outages on DNS. So all these big companies choose a DNS provider. You attack the DNS provider, and all these big companies' services are gone. You basically, if you can't resolve the host names, you can't use the service, which means the service is offline.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that event in particular really kind of showed, we think about the internet as this big decentralized thing, but these days in reality, there's a lot, this one thing takes down Amazon. Amazon takes down a million other things that all rely on it. And then suddenly half the internet that you actually use is gone.
Yep. That Amazon attack. Oh, there was another one since then, wasn't it? Or am I misremembering about how something just took out huge swaths of S3 stuff?
Yes, that was a separate event, but it had the same effect right on the end, where anyone using S3 then in those affected regions, suddenly the websites you use, they're gone.
Pardon, I don't know what's going on here while I'm coughing today. It might be allergies. So the authors started by crawling the web. And where did they start? They went to Alexa. Now, I really know Alexa as being a domain provider, but they provide other services as well. So they just took the top 100,000 domains, and they started looking at the server-to-network information and adding in organizations and countries. And this led to a labeled graph, which contained 1.8 million nodes. Now, that's a lot of nodes.
Heck yes.
350,000 of them were unique IP addresses. So that's roughly, I'm going to say six nodes per IP address, roughly. The nodes are then interconnected by 4.5 million relationships. Now that's huge. That's just a very complex graph. So now that they've mapped all this, they then start talking about what's the most promising target. And so before assessing attacks, we need to use our model to select entities that can either attack victims or the attackers. The selection criteria are based on metrics that reflect the popularity and the influence of entities. So they came up with 6 metrics, how to figure out who to attack. So who hosts the most Alexa domains? It's the US by far. It's 30,000. And then next is the Netherlands with 4,200. And then everything else is sort of down from there. So, and who are the most powerful network operators? It turns out it's Cloudflare, who have 7,000 domains. And then after that, it's Amazon 1 with 2,800, Amazon 2, and then Akamai, each with less than 2,000.
Totally makes sense. Although it is kind of interesting that we live in a time now where Akamai is, 4th down that list.
Well, Cloudflare, I had no idea they had so much. It's just huge.
Yeah, they've really grown monstrously in the last couple of years.
I've never used them, but I know we have services on there. Yeah. That I've worked with services on there.
Yeah, it seems like they end up being the edge for like a huge proportion of, especially like new startup sites or other, new sites that are recently popular.
They must be doing something attractive.
Yeah.
Now, and next I started talking about who has the most JavaScripting servers. I've never thought of someone just being a JavaScript hosting server. Or is it just a server that has JavaScript? They don't make
that quite clear here. I'm not sure either.
I think it's websites that have JavaScript installed on
them. There are, though, also JavaScript-oriented CDNs that specialize in distributing JavaScript, JavaScript sources, I guess you could say. So I don't know if that's it either.
Well, the answer is the U.S. with 48,000. And then then everything else is below 8,000, like Germany, Netherlands, Germany, China. China is 3rd.
Almost at the same rank there as Germany, yeah.
Yep, and not far behind the U.S. It's only down by 500. Now, and then by network operator, who has the most JavaScript? And it's Amazon 1. Nearly twice as many as what Cloudflare has. Amazon 1's at 10,000. So they're just building up, what's the most high value target? That's what all of this criteria is. What's the most high value target? And we might get criticized for, why are you demonstrating all this information? Well, this isn't secret information. if you're thinking nefarious thoughts, you're thinking about this already. The reason that you bring this to someone's attention is so that they can use this information when they're deciding how to best defend. How do I choose where I'm going to put my resources? Am I going to put it on the one that, has the most impact, or am I going to distribute my resources across multiple providers so that if one of them goes down, I'm only half affected or a third affected, depending on how you distribute your resources. So don't criticize the message. Use it to figure out what you're going to do in order to provide the best service for your clients. So the next thing, that was JavaScript. So let's look at mail servers. So who hosts the most email servers? By far, it's the US, 41,000. 41,000 MXs.
Whoa.
I actually find that's kind of low. I would have thought it was higher, but I guess there's a whole lot of domains that don't do their own MX.
Yeah, that's true.
They're all farming it out to someone else. So behind that, there's Germany and Great Britain. So it drops down to 12 at Germany and then halves to 6,000 at Great Britain. And it's all 6,000 down to slot number 5. So what network operator has the most MX records? It's Microsoft. I'm surprised by that. I wouldn't have thought Microsoft had that.
I suppose Outlook's pretty big and their kind of exchange stuff, and I imagine there's a lot of like hosted exchange and that kind of stuff. So I wonder if that's maybe the connection. It seems like they've got kind of a special, like Google's got the consumer sphere with Gmail and Yahoo, but Microsoft I think owns the enterprise in terms of hosted email.
Yep. What's surprising here, OVH, I've heard of them, but I've never used them.
They're like a bare metal server vendor among other products.
Yep. So it drops from 8,500 for Microsoft down to 2,500 roughly for each of OVH and Hetzner. And then after that, it's United L, which I've never heard of.
No, I haven't either. I do have a Hetzner machine myself, though, so I can speak to them a little bit.
You have a which? A Hetzner?
Yes, I do.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. Just kind of randomly, I fell into it. It was running FreeBSD for a while, although right now it's running Ubuntu 16.04.
How long have you had this box?
I guess for about the past year. For a while, I was sharing it with a friend. We were using it just kind of as a machine to do some experimentation on ZFS arrays.
They do bare metal or VMs?
Yes, it's a bare metal machine. Yeah, it's kind of fun. That's most of my, pretty much every other server that I rent is a VPS of some sort.
I've got some. Most of my stuff is bare metal, but I've got something from RootBSD that is a VM.
Nice. Yeah.
Oh wait, no, that one may be a real box. I'm not sure. And then I've got something from DigitalOcean, and then the rest is all real hardware.
Ooh, fancy! Look at you.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure how I wound up there.
Exactly.
So now what's the next most important thing? Name servers. If you take out the name servers, nobody's getting anywhere. So the number of name servers, the US, 34,000 name servers in the US. That's an incredible amount. It sounds like a lot of little companies are running their own DNS. And then it drops down to 6,700 for Germany, and then it's all below 4,000 for each of France, Great Britain, Netherlands. Did I say 3? I meant 4,000. Canada. First time I've noticed Canada in these lists. It may have been, it was up there with MX records.
You 3, just want to be proud.
Yeah, I'm not paying attention. So who runs the most name servers? It's OVH and Hetzner in second position, both with about 2,300 and 2,100. Amazon's way down there. Well, not way down there. It's down there at about 1,900. And Cloudflare, people don't use Cloudflare for NS like they do other places. Cloudflare only has 700. And then GoDaddy, I would have thought they would have been higher up there as well.
Yeah, they've been around for a long time.
All right. So I think remember when we were talking about JavaScript before? I think we have our answer about what those JavaScript stuff was. Now they're over JavaScript providers. This metric measures the number of JS hosting servers whose authoritative name server is hosted in a given country and or network block. So yeah, this must be the JavaScript actual hosting companies. And sadly to say, the United States has 42,000 JavaScript hosting providers. That's, 41,000. Then it drops to like 3,000 for Germany, Netherlands, and China. Now, if you convert that over to network operator, most of them are Amazon One, by far at 16,000.
Interesting.
And then Cloudflare is at 5,000. I'm finding the distributions between country and network operator for the different services to be very interesting. Like you would think that if you're using, say, Cloudflare for your website, you might also be using them for your MX or your NS, but it's turning not to be the case. It seems like people think, well, I'm going to use this provider for this particular service and this other provider for this other service.
I suppose in a way, maybe that's, trying to hedge your bets and increase your resiliency.
Yep. I agree. It's distributing.
Yeah. It's better than we could have expected. You would, like you're saying, like you would imagine like, yep, all right, well, I've got my Amazon EC2 instance. I'll use their, edge services and CDNs and their DNS and blah, blah, blah.
I wonder what it'd be like to have a hidden DNS master and have two DNS servers with one provider and two DNS servers with another provider. And they all sync from your master. I don't see anything wrong with that. Yeah. It should just work. If they're both providing good service, it would be transparent to anyone else.
Yeah, I think so. Interesting.
Someone's going to correct us.
Exactly.
So where were we? NS Records, Cloudflare, Microsoft, Cloudflare. No, we were further down. Did I miss it?
We were just on JS again.
JS. Okay. Network provider. Amazon One there.
There we go.
So who controls the most email server name servers? So the previous one was name servers for JavaScript operators, okay? That's what we just talked about. I didn't make that clear. So these are, it measures the number of JavaScript hosting servers whose authoritative name server is hosted in a given country or by a given network operator. So all they're looking at is, how can we take out the name servers that power the JavaScript servers? So that's what that last metric was. So this next metric is for mail server name servers. So that's who hosts the name servers for all the mail servers. And again, it's the United States at 28,000. And then cutting that in half, the Netherlands at 14,000. I'm surprised that the Netherlands...
Yeah, it's kind of a random appearance in this list.
Has so many MX name servers. That's an incredible list. Maybe who is hosting there and why? That's interesting. So then it's Ireland at 11,000. That's also a huge number. So
I wonder if it's all related to concerns about being able to access those emails or wanting them to be stored in places with nice laws in that regard. We'll have to dig more on that one. That's interesting. So now taking the same numbers and looking at them by network operator, we're again with 11,500 at Microsoft. So there are 11,500 name servers hosted by Microsoft that control the DNS from mail servers. And then it's Cloudflare drops down to Cloudflare at roughly half that, and then Amazon One, it drops to 2,000. And then there's a bunch in the 1,000 to 2,000 range, down to Dyn DNS at position 1237. Yeah. So, So now that you've gathered all this information, who are you going to attack first? Well, they say now we're in the position to evaluate the potential impact of 3 different attacks: distribution of malicious JavaScript content, email sniffing, and a DDoS attack against a core service provider. In each case, a target can be selected by consulting the tables above. Oh, how easy.
Sounds very straightforward to me. So let's pretend theoretically, that you now wish to distribute malicious JavaScript
I
content.
definitely do. I really do.
I'm sure you do. The authors consider 3 ways to do this: direct compromise, injecting malicious JavaScript, or redirecting requests for JS content via compromised name resolution. And people underestimate the importance of securing your DNS. If you're a big hosting provider and people are loading all this jQuery from your servers, and suddenly you change the DNS so they're not requesting it from the real server, but requesting it from a malicious server, then you can give them any content you want, and it can be pretty nasty.
Yeah, and it just gets blindly executed by the client.
Yeah, because the HTTPS, well, allegedly work.
Yeah, exactly.
So they have a nice graph here to say how many Alexa domains that can be reached by the first 2 of these. Now, scrolling down, the attack results show that countries can be very powerful attackers. For example, the United States hosts 47,000 JavaScript hosters, which could distribute malicious code to about 16% of the top 100,000 Alexa domains. You would have to do a lot in order to distribute all that. This is all highly theoretical. But yeah, if the U.S. government had the power to basically take over all these domains and decide to distribute this, well, that's what would happen. But the next thing they start talking about is, what about JavaScript inclusion over unprotected connections? I'm guessing they mean HTTP.
Right.
So over HTTP, it's very easy or very straightforward.
Right.
If you change the DNS records, because then they're just going to pull whatever it is they've got.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
There's no
the
checking,
name.
right? You're just it's just a dumb pipe. Hey, shove some JS, some HTML, and go for it.
Yeah. At least if you're doing it over HTTPS, they then have to forge or steal a certificate, or rather the certificate key. Because certificates are always public. It's the certificate key that you got to keep undercover. So the attack result is the number of websites, including a resource hosted on a server, whose name server is colluding or compromised. And that's the key.
Right.
You don't have to compromise the domain, the website. You just have to compromise the name server, or get the hosting company of the name server to say, yeah, we'll do this for you. Why not? You're a good friend. Here, have this connection in. This is fine.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's so they conclude here that the United States, Google, and Dyn DNS stand out here because the United States is the top by number of DNS redirects, and I don't know what the second half of the table is. I'm getting confused by this now.
There's a lot of tables.
Yes. So I'm now down to the email sniffing part. So let's say we want to acquire a large number of emails, and an attacker can rely on various techniques, but in the paper, they're only going to look at 2. One is by acquiring them direct from the email server. The second is by redirecting an email client towards a malicious mail server, and we'll accept the email, keep a copy, and forward it on. And that's as simple as you can do. So how do you do this? What you do is you go in and you change the MX records. Now, they don't go into details about how you do that, but if you have a presence in these companies, you can easily just insert an MX server in there, have the IP address reassigned to you. That's a simple way of doing it. If you have the collusion of the DNS provider. Now, basically, they claim that the United States alone could acquire email for 25% of the most popular websites. So that's a lot of email. So that's 25% of the top 100,000, 250,000, 25,000. So they get all the email for 250,000 websites.
Yikes.
That's a lot of stolen data.
Yeah, that really is.
Not all of it's going to be useful, but some of it will. So they're just going through this. There's a lot of assumptions on this. So don't start being afraid that this is actually happening. It may be, but I don't think it is. But their results, let's jump down to the results. Our results show that already just a few players may have an extensive power. 14 countries and 14 autonomous systems can, directly or indirectly, affect the security of about 23% of websites. In addition, our results show that little has been learned from past attacks. For example, 70% of JavaScript inclusion is still done over unprotected connections, i.e. HTTP URLs as opposed to HTTPS, which can be used to mount the Great Cannon attack. I'm going to have to look that up. I don't remember what that Great Cannon attack was. Do you have any memory of it?
I don't. Let's see.
So basically, yes. If you can do something over HTTPS, do it over HTTPS. There's no reason to do HTTP anymore with sensitive information. If you're just passing out plain text that isn't used as input to anything else, then fine, do that. But if you're fetching JavaScript, definitely do it over HTTPS.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, very much true. Okay, so here is some information about the Great Cannon of China is an attack tool that is used to launch distributed denial of service attacks on websites by intercepting massive amounts of web traffic and redirecting them to targeted websites. So it sounds like it's a facility related to the great so-called Great Firewall of China, where they can then rewrite attacks, redirect them to send massive amounts of traffic towards targets. Yikes!
Nasty stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
but that makes sense, right? Like, so if you can, if you have unencrypted, unsecured JavaScript, then you just send some JavaScript down that says like, hey, tell your browser open a whole bunch of connections to this guy over here, and now you've got a big distributed DDoS. Yikes!
It's as simple as that.
It really is. I mean, you could probably do it in a couple hours if you had, you had the technology behind you.
So I don't really know how to interpret this. Do you wind up going with countries that are less influential, or do you wind up going with more obscure providers? Or if you're a big company, you need the big guns of other big companies to provide your infrastructure. So I'm not really sure what the bigger companies can do here that are using these services. If they are using the hosting infrastructure of someone else, you've really got to rely on them, on the integrity and honesty of the other group.
Yeah, and you get these kinds of catch-22s, right, where you're already using the systems. It makes it super easy for you to continue to use their services. There's a huge incentive to do that. And at some point, like you're talking about, like sometimes, if you're of a certain scale, you need someone also of that scale to be able to provide the services that you need.
Imagine how hard it is for you as an individual to swap operating systems.
Yeah, right.
No, I don't want to change this. So imagine you're a big company with all this infrastructure built around one provider. The
inertia is just magnified.
Yep. And then you decide to change it.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
It's not going to work.
No, it's not. Yikes. Well, this is kind of interesting just from the, I think the analog as it strikes me is kind of, doing threat analysis against, power generation systems, any kind of that kind of infrastructure at a national level. This seems like the same kind of analysis, but applied to the internet. So it's useful, even if there's not a direct takeaway or this is exactly what we need to do. I think it's useful just to have a better understanding of, what are we getting ourselves into and how much are we really relying on just a few autonomous systems?
Yeah, because if I was an evildoer, and I had lots of money, I'd start buying up all these companies that provide things.
Yeah.
And then eventually send in the evildoers to do evil things. It wouldn't be that difficult.
Definitely. And we just have this low, the more conglomerated we get, then the easier it is for, evildoers with privileged access, or who, you can then just try to shut down one organization, and suddenly that's a huge swath of the internet.
It's gone.
Yikes. All right. Well, anything else you want to talk about before we move on?
No.
Awesome. All right. Well, if you're now scared of the big guy, head on over to our first sponsor tonight. That's our friend at Ting. Ting, mobile that makes sense. It really is a smarter way to do mobile. If you head on over to techsnap.ting.com, you can get started. You'll get a $25 service credit. And you might be thinking, $25? Yeah, okay, that sounds all right. But wait until I tell you. Prices at Ting start at just $6 a month. Click on that rates button right there on their homepage. That'll pop you over to their wonderful rates page. You'll see. So, Ting, things start at $6 a month. One line, $6 a month. That's it. Then it's pay for what you use. So, you don't use any minutes? That's $0 a month. You don't use any text messages? That's $0 a month. And then you just kind of choose, all right, yeah, well, I use about a gig of data a month. Your monthly bill would be only $22. I mean, yes, yeah, there's some taxes and fees and other things, but Ting can't do anything about that. So we're not going to talk about that right now. Ting charges you $22 a month. That's amazing. Your service credit, that could pay for your first month of service, and it does for a huge number of people, myself included. Some other great things about Ting. Instead of having all these, overages, contracts, early termination fees, those just don't exist at Ting. You sign up, you start paying your $6 a month, that activates your line, then you just pay for what you use. You don't have to worry about trying to, plan 6 months, a year at a time, thinking, well, what's the peak usage? I might need it a month. I don't want to pay the overage charges. I'll make sure I get, I think 5 gigs a month. That should do it for me. No, that's crazy. That's crazy. You probably don't use that much if you have Wi-Fi anywhere in your life, except for maybe a couple times a year. So why are you paying for all that excess capacity? It doesn't make sense. Just jump on over to techsnap.ting.com. Get started with mobile that makes sense. There's no early termination fees. There's no contracts. All the extras you've come to expect from a modern, sophisticated phone plan. Things like three-way calling, things like tethering built right in. There's no extra tethering fee. There's no special tethering data that you have to pay more for or you're restricted access to. No, Ting's not about that. They don't want to mess around. They don't have gimmicks. They're not trying to become your next media platform. They're not trying to become the next giant corporation that rules America. It's just not their way. But they're dedicated to good customer service, a simple, intuitive dashboard, really the best dashboards in the game, an awesome mobile app, and customer service that has real humans ready to talk to you, ready to make sure that you have the best experience possible with a service provider. They've got both GSM and CDMA, so whatever's better in your area, Ting's got what you need. And they've been doing it for a long time. Ting understands they're cord cutters, they're nerds just like us, and they've got the phone plan that makes sense for you. So head on over to techsnap.ting.com. That lets Ting know you appreciate them sponsoring the TechSNAP program, and it'll get you started with a $25 service credit. Ting's great for a number of things. Just use it as a backdoor to your network, an extra phone in the car when you're on camping trips, or just as a backup device. Hey, you break your main phone, boom, you got your Ting line ready. Thank you, Ting, for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Alrighty then, on to our next story of the day. Looks like we're heading over to Twitter with some Windows security news. This is interesting. Not something that comes up all the time on this program, but I think it affects a large number of our viewers, probably a larger number than we might think.
Well, I've never used Windows 10 Enterprise. I've used Windows 7 at work, but it's not the Enterprise, not an Enterprise edition.
Okay.
But basically, what this chap was doing was experimenting with the Windows 10 privacy settings. So he would turn something off and see what would happen. He would block it through the privacy settings or disable something, and then monitor the network traffic to see if stuff was happening that shouldn't be happening. And lo and behold, he found time and time again that stuff was happening that he didn't think should be happening. Some of which is kind of surprising, and we'll get to that in terms of he removed an app, the app got reinstalled, and firewall rules got added. He didn't do that. So we'll get into this. So here, he disabled Teradu and IPv6. I don't know what Teradu is, but he can clearly see using, there it is. If you blow it up, he can see that Teradu is disabled And you can see that it is still going out to Google Analytics and doing stuff. So why? It's a system with a minimal software install, all default Windows Store apps removed, and nothing else is running on it. So just basically, he's tried to get back to a bare bones Windows 10 Enterprise VM. So here he has Smart Screen disabled, but Smart Screen is still connecting to Smart Screen. And Teradu, I'm told, is an IPv6 to IPv4 to IPv6 tunneling software.
Right. Yes.
Sorry, that just came in. So there's another example here, and this Twitter stream is just filled with examples of something that's disabled, but it's still connecting out. So I'm not really sure if you disable something, does it actually stop it? You would think if something was disabled, it wouldn't be able to run. I'm sure it's not the case where you've disabled something, but it's still running. So of course it keeps trying to reach out. I don't think it would be that simple. So next case, he has telemetry disabled, plus the tracking related services are disabled, plus a few reg hacks, but it's still connecting. Allowed telemetry is definitely disabled, and application telemetry is enabled. Turn off application
that's some
telemetry
funny verbiage
enabled.
there.
That's terrible. And here you can see that he has every policy set to not sync settings, plus he has the sync related services disabled, but something is still connecting out. The next example he gives is he has error reporting disabled, and the service is disabled, but it still connects out. And you can see the connections going out there to Watson Data, Microsoft.com at aka DNS.net.
What do you bet that's our friends at Akamai?
Wow. What about KMS validation? That's disabled, and it's still connecting through to there. So, and then he goes on to say, every possible setting to block connections to Microsoft except for updates. Here are a bunch of advertising-related connections. And he just shows this big list, half of which seem to be advertising-related. So, during that time, there were a list of apps that connected to the internet. All the ad-related connections were from system. So there's a bunch of other stuff running, but everything that went out was the system going out there. It wasn't other apps, it was the system. So his conclusion, and this was done on the 21st, which is about 10 days ago, it seems like Microsoft doesn't honor its own group policy settings. But the big problem here is that people will use third-party apps instead of just disabling stuff to block all this stuff from happening. And they will probably inadvertently block security-related stuff. Because if you're trying to use the system tools and the system tools don't work as expected, you're going to use a third-party tool to achieve the same thing. And something's going to go wrong. People will block automatic updates, which is going to lead to more compromises, which is going to lead to more massive DDoS, stuff like that. If this is all true, they've really got to improve it, because if you disable something, it should be disabled. There shouldn't be anything going out like this. Mark Burnett, that's whose tweets we're reading, by the way. Sorry for not mentioning that sooner. If you search for Windows 10 on GitHub, the first few pages of results are tools to defeat spying.
Yikes. Now,
is this spying by Microsoft? Is that what they're referring to? Is this third-party spying?
No, I believe it's the first-party spying. Tools that will automatically set all those registry settings or group policy settings that we're seeing maybe are not effective. But I think that like Windows 10 configuration tools to try to enhance your privacy.
Okay. So this is a tweet that I alluded to earlier. I deleted Paint 3D and Microsoft silently reinstalled it and added a firewall to allow it to connect out.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
That's really nasty.
Wow.
So I can. Why would the OS reinstall it And why would, when the OS isn't, I can see this as a convenience factor. Trying to make it easier for users who have blocked it, when they go to install it, they automatically enable it.
Right.
Sure, but when you try and make it easy for non-technical people, you're making it impossible for technical people. Because that's definitely something you don't expect.
No,
if you remove
it's really
something,
not.
you don't expect it to be reinstalled. And there is a big disclaimer here, which we probably should have mentioned at the start. Mark states that this was my initial testing. It wasn't totally controlled or documented and still needs to be verified. So there may be a lot more that comes out of as a result of this, but we'll see. We'll see. It is interesting to find out what he found.
And I mean, it's kind of, I think, especially like the ad stuff, to me, it really just shows it almost speaks to something larger, like the way, the tool sets we have, and the difference between Windows 10 and Windows 7, especially just in that, Microsoft internally has adopted a lot of these like web-first, analytics-based data gathering techniques that we see so predominantly on the web, but you don't really think about it at the OS layer. I think we're all kind of used to, especially in the open source world, of like, yeah, okay, well, my operating system, it's really just concerned with being my operating system, running the hardware, exposing interface, as syscall layer, all that. But boy, no, when you see these, like, it really seems like that, analytics and all that is really bundled tightly into the core of their latest operating system, and that's kind of, I mean, it's not surprising in any way, but it's a little disheartening.
I wonder if someone has done similar for Apple.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because I know when you set up an Apple box, it says, can we collect anonymous stats? And it'd be interesting to see how much data is going out over the wire.
Yeah. And see, that's part of the problems here too, right? Is like if you can't trust those things, I would like to be able to submit anonymous data to help improve the products that I use. But if I don't trust the parties who are using that data or gathering it to respect my consent and my wishes, then I'm really just, everyone's going to start saying no, and developers don't get the kind of feedback they're interested in.
I say no.
Yeah. No, and I think that's fair. I mean, that's you're right.
Yeah, I just don't know if I can trust them.
Yeah, right. See, exactly. That's exactly the problem.
And apparently, even if you disable it, it still goes out.
Right. So it doesn't matter. You really just clicked yes. It's fine. It always clicks yes.
Yep.
Yikes.
So it'll be interesting to see where this goes, if anywhere.
Yeah. Maybe this is some good feedback items if people have experience with the Windows 10 telemetry and those things, or some of their favorite tools to attempt to disable those settings. I'm sure we'd be interested in hearing about them.
Yeah, I want to know more. If you know more, feedback, please. Thank you.
Exactly. All right. Well, if you are sick of talking about Windows, let's just jump right over to our next sponsor this evening. That's our friends over at iXsystems. iXsystems is the hardware service provider you wish you had heard about years ago. If you've got a Windows box at home, you're feeling fed up, you really want some powerful Unix in your life, go on over to iXsystems. Maybe you've heard about the brand new i9 coming from Intel. You can bet that iX and their awesome relationship with those incredible Intel processors will be able to build you some rigs with that just as soon as it's available. Not only that, they've got a huge staff of talented sales engineers standing by ready to help you out. They want to form a partnership to make sure that you understand that, they know your server should be custom. It deserves to be custom, that you have a workload that, matters to you, that's important to your business or project. And they understand that. They want to work with you to make sure that, you don't have to be the be all end all hardware guru here. You don't need to understand exactly how a SAS expander works. You don't have to understand how many top of rack switches you need. iXsystems is here to help. They've got people who have been in this business for a long time, really knows the ins and outs of hardware, software, open source software. If you head on over to techsnap.ixsystems.com, you'll find their definitive guide to buying hardware for open source systems. This is a great white paper you can hand out. If you are in charge of procuring new hardware, or maybe you just know some people who do, maybe they're fed up with terrible support cycles, big box companies with bad support, confusing interfaces, really just a hassle to work with. You don't have to put up with that. Especially if you're using one of those vendors, they're just reselling the big name products. They don't have any real value add. go to iXsystems. You'll have an entirely different experience. iXsystems build these systems customs for you so they can really support them in a way that really no one else can. Things like true white glove support. They make sure that, any hardware that you're going to use, it's been burned in. That especially matters for hard drives. They do thorough testing to ensure that if that hard drive is going to fail in, its first couple months of life, that's going to happen before it leaves IX's hands. And if you want, they'll send you the server ready to go, completely set up, configured just with the software you want, ready to be stuck in a rack, turned on, plugged in, and boom, your new server is ready to go. If you check out their website, you'll see some of the huge names that they work with. People like Disney, Sony, NASA, Berkeley, Adobe, Symantec, GM. They have experience building petabytes of storage. So whether you just need, the very popular FreeNAS Mini, which is a great solution if you just need a new NAS or backup server for your home or home office, to things like the TrueRack, which is a huge scalable system ready for just about any enterprise's storage needs. And you don't have to worry about being locked into one of these crazy proprietary systems where you have to keep buying all their own components. No. That's one of the best things about iXsystems. They work with the open source community. They're huge sponsors of the OpenZFS project. They understand that ZFS is really the file system of the future. It's the best file system for enterprise storage or just for home use. You can see that if you head on over to their blog. You'll see just how involved they are in the community. You'll see that they're always going to different conferences. They've got great tips here about combating WannaCry and other ransomware with OpenZFS snapshots. And it just goes to show iX, they're a member of the community, and above that, they're just a great company. So head on over to iXsystems.com/TechSNAP, get started, go start a conversation, and I'm sure you'll end up with some hardware you'll never forget. Thank you to iX for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. All right, that brings us to our final main topic today, and that's some news from Zomato. Tell us more.
I had never heard of them before. I did not know Zomato. Did you? Yeah. I was not familiar with them at all.
The name was kind of vaguely familiar. So what are they to people who, like perhaps ourselves, who are not familiar?
Oh, now you're asking really hard questions.
Yes, that's right, I am.
I did look this up, and I think if I recall correctly, and I'm looking it up again, it's related to food. Find the best restaurants, cafes, and bars in Ottawa is what comes up in my mind. So they're using GeoIP to know that I'm in Ottawa. But basically, it's, luxury dining. Here's your sweet tooth. You want super sushis, kick-ass burgers, or what's trending this week?
I do want those things.
I'm sure you do. And then they go on and talk about the top reviewers in Ottawa, the top photographers, the top bloggers, stuff like that. So I'm not exactly sure their model, but they do have a link here, products for businesses. Get more out of your business without losing focus. So basically, they can claim their listing to get advanced analytical and engagement tools. So it sounds like they're setting up, it's sort of like a concentrated Google for businesses in a particular area. And I think that's their data model, their marketing model. I'm not familiar enough with them, but that's not the point. The point is not what they do, it's what happened to them. And this blog post that they came out with about a week ago about a security breach that occurred. And what I find interesting about this security breach is how the breach occurred and who did it and why. Now, traditionally, when you have data breaches, people are just stealing data to steal data, say it's part of identity theft. But there were a couple of very simple procedures here, and it will reinforce for you why you should be using a password manager and having a password different on every location, and why two-factor authentication is so important. If either two of those bits, different password or two-factor authentication, had been in place, this breach wouldn't have happened. But, all right. So, company has been breached. This is their post that comes out and say, here's what really happened. This is their close to full disclosure of what went on, and hopefully others can learn from this. So they refer to the previous blog posts, and part of their infrastructure that was used to store users' information was breached by an ethical hacker. Okay, possibly ethical. That's debatable. You'll see later. The data downloaded as a result of this breach contained 5 data points for 17 million users, specifically name, email address, numeric user ID, username, and password hashes. The password hashes leak was a little more contained and was only a subset of 6.5 million users. So roughly, if you're on Zomato, chances are it's almost 50-50, a little less than 50-50 that your password hash was downloaded. All the other users were either Google or Facebook users, and they didn't have password information for those users. So in a way, this is good, but not really. So the hacker had posted these data points on a dark web marketplace. We were lucky we could get in touch with a person hacker in good time. As it turned out, the hacker was a security researcher, an ethical hacker, who would put up the data for sale to get our attention and to teach us a lesson. I find that highly questionable. Ethical hackers would not download all that information. Generally, you download 1 or 2 pieces of information and then stop and then do a full disclosure to the people that you've discovered this from, right, and take it from there. You don't download 17 million instances of data.
It's just waiting to be abused if you have it there, right?
You don't.
And they don't really mention here at all, at least yet, if this person had tried to reach out to them before posting it, because you'd think there are easier communication channels if you wanted to alert a company than just starting to post it on the darknet.
Yeah. To teach us a lesson, that comes out, that's just wrong.
Right.
Teach someone a lesson.
That's not the kind of verbiage that we would expect from an ethical security
an ethical
researcher.
Hacker,
yeah.
Right. So he or she only wanted us to launch a good bug bounty program on HackerOne, as he or she wanted to make sure that security researchers are rewarded well for their time. That's blackmail. What's the difference between blackmail and extortion? I forget. Someone will tell us. So the hacker also shared the database with us and took the sales link down once we promised to launch the bug bounty program. So yeah, this is blackmail, basically. The hacker also agreed to destroy the data at their end immediately. Well, how do you prove that you destroyed the data? You just don't. Whereas if all they'd taken is 1 or 2 examples of the data and to say, here's how I did it, fix it. That's entirely different from taking all this data down. The use of the word ethical, I think, is being forced upon them given their position, because I wouldn't call this hacker ethical.
It sounds like they've maybe here, negotiated or reached like a good outcome or a better outcome, and that they're being perhaps overly charitable or are in this position. Yeah.
Well, you watch now. I'll become the target of this ethical hacker.
That's right.
Pardon. So this is the interesting part. The first that was interesting. What comes up next is how they got in. So this started in November 2015 when another web host's user database was leaked online with plain text passwords. How do you leak plain text passwords? They weren't stored as hashes. They were stored in plain text. One of our developers had his personal hosting account with the service. As a result of that, his email address and password became publicly available. Unfortunately, the developer was using the same email and password combination on GitHub. So if he had changed it, if he'd used a password manager, this wouldn't have happened. Back then, when the passwords leaked, we were not using two-factor authentication on GitHub. We had been using two-factor authentication on GitHub for the last few months. Well, so basically, the hacker was able to use the developer's login to get into the GitHub account and review one of the code repositories to which the developer had access. So basically, the company stored some of their code on GitHub, which is publicly accessible. So this happened sometime last year, but for some reason, the hacker only exploited the code very recently. So getting access to a part of the code didn't give the hacker direct access to the database. Our systems are only accessible from a specific set of IPs, but the hacker was able to scan through the code and ended up exploiting a vulnerability in the code to access the database via remote code execution. This bit is very vague. I'm not really sure what happened here.
Right, there's a lot that could be going on. But it sounds like that privileged access let him find,
He found a vulnerability. The vulnerability was already there.
Right.
So he didn't inject anything. The piece of code which was vulnerable was part of a deprecated system and hadn't been modified for a few years now.
Of course.
So it was deprecated, which means it was due to be replaced. Please don't use it, but it was still online.
Yes. I think that's a surprisingly common thing at a number of companies, unfortunately.
Yep. So having access to the code, they say here, quote, yes, someone has some of our code, and that's a risk, unquote. Well, having the code shouldn't make it riskier. It should give people information about your system and how to look at targeting it, but knowing the code itself should not make your system vulnerable, because look at open source. Yeah. SSH depends upon that.
Yeah.
And okay, so now going down here. So in hindsight, what helped us contain the extent of the breach? Our use of multiple environments, each segregating and containing a part of our business, ensured the data breach was limited to only one part of our database, and the hacker did not gain access to all the various databases used by different businesses. So it sounds like they store different stuff in different places and grant access based upon need, which sounds good.
Yeah, that does sound good.
Additionally, we had made two-factor authentication on GitHub mandatory a few months back, which cut off the hackers' access to the account that they got into. So they were working off an old code base, which has significantly changed over the past few months, limiting the extent the hacker could access. So that's just coincidental. I don't think that's really something that they did that slowed them down. So then this one's interesting. Keeping lines of communication open with the hacker helped us understand the motive of the breach and address the very reasonable demands. This in turn led to the hacker cooperating with us by pulling down the sales listing from the dark web. So apparently the sales listing was just a bluff to get their attention, and presumably the hacker never intended to sell this data. But they still had that data, and that data could have easily been taken over by someone else, and we're only taking their word for it that nothing happened. Let's just wait and see a few months and see whether or not this data actually turns up in the public domain. So we have good network restrictions in place, which ensured that our servers weren't compromised. So the servers weren't compromised, but the data was pulled down, which also means that our payment processing systems, which run on a separate secure environment, were never compromised. And they submitted a compliance report, blah, 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 to Visa on the payment gateway partner. So basically, I'm not finding what helped contain the extent. Those things sort of make sense, but basically, I think the only reason he didn't go further is because the exploit didn't allow him to look at anything other than that database, and that's all that there was in that database. I think everything else was just unlucky. I'm not convinced that these things help contain the extent of the breach, because 16 million rows being downloaded somewhere else is rather interesting. How are you able to download 16 million rows remotely? I want to know more about that side of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's perhaps a sizable data transfer as well.
So, what's next? We are also in the process of introducing a monetary reward bug bounty program on HackerOne very soon. So, thanks for deleting the data, and we'll get this bug bounty in place very soon. Last thing, we have since been advised by multiple industry experts to take some action against the developer in order to set an example and influence public perception. Now, They said developer there. The developer, they must mean the developer who used the same
I believe
password
so,
credentials and so. We know that this mishap is on the organization and not an individual. Instead of pinning the responsibility on someone, we're going to use this as a learning opportunity for all of us. Yeah, if they just blamed the developer only gave someone access to the code. That didn't give them access to the system.
Yeah.
The guy then read the code, found a vulnerability. If anything, what's at fault is the code, which is not necessarily the developer's code.
Right. You need to get blamed there.
It's the company's code, and the company should have found the error in the code and fixed the vuln.
Yeah, and to that point as well, like I think, something we've seen like that I've been rather pleased with when we were talking about like Joyent's outage the other week, as well as the recent AWS outage, etc. That really, when these sorts of things happen, it's almost always a failure in process rather than, there may be individual failures that happen, but that can only happen when you don't have a robust process that can account for those things, because there will always be human mistakes.
Yep. Like that guy, what was that Joyent where the guy shut down?
Yes, they rebooted a whole data center.
The head node of the data center, which shut everything else down. He only meant to shut down one node, and he shut down the master node. Yeah, what a sickening feeling that person must have had in their stomach.
That was a great video, though. We'll have to maybe post it up again, because that was I think the whole TechSNAP audience would enjoy it.
You talking about the video by
Brian Cantrell?
Yes, that one.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. Anything else you want to talk about here about Zomato and their problems with this ethical hacker?
I would have liked to have seen more technical details about how they got in. I mean, this is sort of very high level, and they're not actually giving us any details as to what was actually exploited and how it's actually been fixed. I know they're trying to be cautious about revealing further information, which will help other people break in. But no, we've seen more detail in other bug reports about how something worked.
Yes.
So.
Well, and it seems like at least part of the problem here, when your code gets designed in a way where you assume that, that you can use its privacy as security, then you can't. You're in this position where you can't share those things. And if someone does get access, now that really is privileged access.
Yes.
And belays maybe, poor management of secrets or other things. So it's hopefully will be a good lesson for other companies out there.
Yeah, but we can't.
But there's not enough info for it to be.
Give us more information. I'd love to see an update. And if anyone is listening from Zomato, please give us more details, please.
Exactly. Awesome. All right. Well, with that, let's jump on over to our final sponsor this evening, and that's our friends over at DigitalOcean.com. Maybe you're encouraged by some of the troubles here. You want to start learning how to become an ethical hacker yourself, perhaps more ethical than in our last segment. One of the best places to start with a system that you can just play with yourself is DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean is cloud computing designed for developers. They make it so easy to get started with a VPS of your very own. Not only a VPS, but it's based on real KVM virtualization. They've got 40 gigabit E right to the hypervisor, SSDs throughout, and most recently, a ton of new, awesome, enterprise-friendly options. Things like monitoring, load balancing, high CPU droplets, expandable block storage, and private networking between droplets in the same data center. All of these things and more make it so easy to get started. Plus, when you use our promo code SNAPOcean, that'll get you a $10 credit. And prices at DigitalOcean start at just $5 a month. Yeah, that's right. I said it. It's real. $5 a month. For that $5 a month, you get 512 MB of memory, a one core processor, 20 gigs of SSD goodness, and a whopping terabyte of transfer. They've also got hourly prices. Hey, maybe you just need some short-term compute, something like this. I just go flirt sometimes when your home computers aren't enough. For just 24 cents an hour, you can get 16 gigs of RAM, 8 cores, 160 gig disk, and 6 terabytes of transfer. That should be enough for just about any project that you're working on. It's a great way to spin up, hey, you want to play with Nextcloud. You want to play with FreeBSD. You want to play with a Linux distribution you've never played with before. You're trying to play with, Kubernetes, set up your own cloud system, what have you. You're trying to replicate some attacks. You want to play with SQL injection. DigitalOcean is a great playground for all those things. Plus, they have things like snapshots, so you can easily back up, restore your system to a previous state after you've compromised it. They make it so easy, especially with their community page. DigitalOcean pays real editors to take contributions from the community and turn it into some of the best documentation on the internet. It's gotten to the point where, you're just searching for any old how-to on a Linux or BSD system, and 9 times out of 10, you'll end up on DigitalOcean's awesome, curated documentation. That's really what makes the difference. That and their amazing API. You can tell it's amazing because they use it for their UIs, for their tool sets, and the community uses it for a ton of great DigitalOcean apps. In fact, hey, it runs a bunch of stuff here at the JB network too. So it's super handy. You can control your droplets from your phone, from the command line. You can control them from your favorite cloud assistant. It doesn't matter. That's the thing about DigitalOcean. They make it super easy to get started. In under 55 seconds, you'll have a brand new VPS of your very own. You can start playing with the API, start reading some community tutorials, and use our promo code SNAPOcean to get that $10 discount. Thank you very much to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. And that brings us to the next segment of today's show. That's right, it's time for your feedback. First up in today's mailbag is a letter from Richard. Richard's writing to us about discussing capacity planning with ZFS and snapshots. It's an interesting topic. Thank you for writing to us, Richard. He writes, without ZFS, it's easy. You can calculate your burn rate with observations over a few months and divide your free space by that amount. Here he means, you can calculate how much you're using and then kind of get an average, how much space you're averaging use. However, with ZFS and snapshots, deleting a file does not necessarily free up space. How can I estimate how much space is going to be freed up in 30 days, 90 days, 180 days from snapshots expiring to consider in my capacity planning? As an example, if someone deletes a 1 gigabyte file where the longest snapshot retention is 90 days, I know it will take 90 days for the space to become available. But how do I determine these events have happened? I need to forecast that the space I have left now, plus the space that will be freed up each week from expired snapshots, will leave enough space available for day-to-day operations, and to detect an upcoming free space problem far enough in advance to allow time to procure new drives, install, and rebuild disk by disk with larger drives, as I don't have any additional drive bays to work with. Typical management doesn't want to spend money up front to avert a problem. We have plenty of disk space at the moment. Amen there, Richard. And I can't state to management based on our retention policies we will run out of space in XX months. I feel like I won't see it coming until it's too late. Seems like there are all kinds of metrics that could be captured with snapshots and files. Awesome. All right, well, let's turn that right over to our friend Dan, the BSD master.
ZFS destroy is what deletes old snapshots. So do a ZFS destroy -N for dry run. Do a dry run, no op deletion. No data will be deleted. This is useful in conjunction with the -V or -P flags to determine what data would be deleted. Now, if you look at the -P, it's print machine parsable verbose information about the deleted data. So you should be able to feed that into a script and say, oh, when we delete this snapshot in X weeks, it'll free up this amount of space. That might be useful.
You could use that then to do, make some graphs and alerts based on those to compute. Like, all right, well, after this, each cycle of dates, here's how much would be freed. Here's how much will be remaining if we haven't changed anything else. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Now, since I remembered this bit of information, I haven't had opportunity to try it on a machine to see what the actual output it was. But I remember Alan Jude telling me about some flag that would tell you how much is going to be destroyed, and I think it would. I'm quite sure it was this one here. So
if not, give it a. Maybe Alan will write in and tell us how wrong we are.
Maybe he will. Maybe he will. Maybe he will.
Awesome.
But yeah, try that one. I would say that a really good snapshot tool would have something like this built in to say, okay, you've got this much saved. This is how much is going to come free later. But that sounds like a whole graphing thing. I wouldn't be. It almost sounds like there's a market for a third-party tool to say how much.
Yeah.
Snapshots.
Some extra value here of managing your snapshots, capacity planning, all that kind of stuff on top of the primitives that ZFS provides.
And like you said, graph it over time. There's some good snapshot tools that say that add to the snapshot attributes to the file system that say this is supposed to be retained this long. I don't remember the name of the tool that Alan uses that does this, but it sounds very good. Or it might be Mark Feld. One of them uses a snapshot tool that adds attributes to the snapshot file system for retention values and stuff like that.
Well, this seems like an excellent idea for a future deep dive about snapshots, retention, and related material.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for writing in, Richard. Let us know if that works for your use case or if you find something else. Okay, up next is a letter from our friend Laszlo. He writes about a cheap but very good managed switch. In a recent episode, a listener was asking about a low-cost managed switch. I recommend giving a try to MikroTik's network gear. MikroTik is a big name in Europe. The company is from Latvia. I've used many of their routers at home and in an enterprise environment as well. Feld said in US in the past he had issues with them. Dan knows who Feld is. I think you just mentioned him, didn't you, Dan?
Yep.
I have a US market MikroTik RB951. Oh, $45. Hey, that is very reasonable, right in the price range we're thinking about here. He's been using it at home for 2 years so far with no issues at all. It has a lot of features. Perhaps a home user will never use all of them. It takes some time to learn, but using it isn't very different. It's managed like any other professional network device. It can be accessed via SSH, web, and their own software, which run on Windows, but can be easily ported to OS X. And then for more, he provides some links to MikroTik as well as Amazon.com. Yeah, interesting. Yep. Oh, so that's the, is that the router board model line, I wonder? I know I've looked a little bit at MikroTik devices as well. Let's take a look here.
And while that's loading up, full disclosure, I work with Mark and Feld, the two people mentioned that. Sorry, I work with Laszlo and with Feld.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, okay, so these do look pretty neat. I've heard good things about Router OS. I've looked into, I don't have a managed switch at home right now, but boy, especially after this.
You may soon.
I may soon, especially at these prices, like I'm willing to spend a little bit, and I have that new Unify, and so it would be nice to take my network gear up to the next level and then just kind of have some network infrastructure I can depend on for the next 5 years.
Yep. There
Awesome.
you go.
All right. Well, thank you, Laszlo, for writing in. That's great, and please keep these coming. I haven't made the decision yet, so if anyone else has any awesome network switch ideas, I think we'd love to hear about it. On to our final piece of feedback this evening. That's from Aaron. Aaron's writing to us about ButterFS and net neutrality. Hey, Dan and Wes. I love you with every part of my body, but I'm writing to voice not one, but two unpopular opinions. First, I want to say that I'm a bit leery of net neutrality. Don't get me wrong, I don't want ISPs or backbones giving preferential treatment to partners. On the other hand, I don't know how much I want the FCC involved with the internet, given their penchant for limiting free speech on other platforms like TV and radio. Not to mention the current political environment, which is beginning to incline towards limitations on speech from both sides of the aisle. I don't want the internet to become like TV and radio. The thing is, net neutrality doesn't strike at the root of the problem, which is the monopoly that a few companies have on the internet, a monopoly which is reinforced by regulation. I think if the regulations that favor the incumbent in the ISP market were removed, net neutrality would cease to be a concern, or at least would be much less important. Competition is the cure. Sorry to get political. Dan started it. I agree that, with things as they are, net neutrality is important, but it's just propping up a fundamentally broken system. Second thing. I've been using ButterFS for years on personal machines and reaping the benefits of copy on write, snapshots, soft RAID, checksums, and free compression for years. It's the default on OpenSUSE, and nobody in that camp seems to have any problems. There are a few things they say not to do, and have always said not to do. Most famously, don't use RAID 5 or 6, so I buy more disks. No big deal. Though I do think this feature should be disabled by default if it's as potentially destructive as they say. Second, don't use the check command on an FS that isn't broken. Just scrub it to validate integrity. Sure, ButterFS can get slow as you begin to reach disk capacity, and you need to have some hygiene about snapshots and metadata to keep that from happening. But if you treat your ButterFS partitions right, you get a lot of goodness at a much lower performance cost than ZFS. That said, can someone please explain to me what happened that made everyone so paranoid about ButterFS? I don't know. I never have any problems. Maybe it's just me. XOXO, Aaron. Well, thanks for writing, Aaron. Even when you have opinions that, hey, maybe we don't agree with, maybe we do. I think it's awesome to be able to have this dialogue, between you, our audience, and us. So I'll just take this to turn it right here. Dan, would you like to comment about his first point?
Yep. The claim that we don't need to regulate it because the providers will do it right if there's competition, I take issue with that. Look at the vehicles that are manufactured for sale in countries that do not have collision standards. Like the 5-star rating that cars sold in the US and Canada get in terms of different collision tests. If you look at the cars that are sold or manufactured specifically for other markets, such as China, for example, this is the post I saw recently. Those cars perform terribly poorly in collisions. Why? They make them that way because it's cheaper and they can sell them that way. Why do these regulations exist? Because people thought it was a good idea for us not to die in car accidents. So they put those in, and the car manufacturers have to conform in order to sell stuff here. As demonstrated by the cars that are designed for sale in that other country, they don't do it because they don't have to, and it's cheaper for them not to. So that's my claim as to why regulation is needed, because it's pretty clear that when the big ISPs can get away with it, they will get away with it. Introducing more competition isn't enough because the smaller competitors just basically can't do it anyway. Sorry, that doesn't hold water. No, whether you're big or small, you're not going to follow net neutrality unless it's forced upon you. That's been demonstrated several times by different players in the market. And the one that I want to mention is Netflix being asked to pay money in order for us to carry their content. I'm sorry, but Netflix is not your customer. I'm your customer. And if I want to take content from Netflix, I've already paid for that delivery. So you should just be delivering it and not throttling them because you want them to pay for more of your infrastructure. You can't double dip. You can't double dip for the suppliers of the data and the people that are consuming the data. So that's my claim as to why net neutrality is needed.
So I do sympathize with some things. Obviously, we don't have the ideal system. I also don't want to see the internet become too much like over-the-air TV and the way that's regulated. But I don't see that as the direction that it would go, even if net neutrality were to get strong support, which obviously it doesn't really have under the current political regime. But I also think that competition, that we could definitely use with more competition, that would be good as well. But then we're really relying on the marketplace to have the right incentives. So like you were talking about there, I think that's a perfect example. Yeah, people want safe cars, but a lot of times, especially in the world we live in, you're going to choose the cheapest option that you think can get you by. And if it has, they market it as safe, but there's no real guarantees that it's safe. Mm-hmm. I think could see the same thing happening to internet. And a lot of, we like to think that because sure, our audience, us, we would try to choose and support with our money, the companies that weren't doing these kinds of behaviors that we didn't like. But we are a small minority out of all the consumers who are, accessing the internet, and most people don't care. And if they just get a better deal or a cheaper deal, or it gets them free data or free streaming, that's still what they're going to pick, and we're going to be right in the same boat. As for ButterFS, so I think you're right that ButterFS, you can certainly use it day to day without any problems. It is a godsend just to have copy on write and snapshots. I do use it on systems. It's really handy, especially for you're just playing around. It's handy for containers. It's handy for rootfs. I think the biggest problem is, it's kind of multifold. One, CFS was able to be worked on before it was open sourced and put out there behind closed doors at Sun for a long time, and it reached a really stable place before it was seeing heavy deployments outside of that. ButterFS didn't really have that. Secondly, I think when ButterFS came out, there was a lot of excitement, rightfully so, but there was kind of some fanboyism. There's a little bit of bad blood between the ZFS license and Linux community and how that should work, as well as just like sometimes, unfortunately, like the BSD community and the Linux community trying to compete with each other, and BSD, Illumos, all those things. They've got the first class ZFS support. think we're probably rightfully a little jealous of that. So there was Btrfs for at least a while. It really was billed as this, it could be a replacement. Some of its design architecture is a little more flexible. It has some different features, some neat things that ZFS doesn't have. So I think there was some of this like excitement, like, oh, well, we don't need your ZFS. We've got Btrfs. And it just hasn't really been proved out that way. It does work very well for a lot of use cases, on your laptop file system, day-to-day use, whatever. But it has not become the kind of enterprise reliable storage appliance that really is where ZFS shines the most these days. So I think that's where a lot of it comes from. It's not that you can't use Btrfs. It's just that it hasn't become this like all-in-one wonderful file system that you can use for so many things and have really absolute trust in. Plus, they've had some kind of bad PR or botched marketing in the ways that they've marketed it. Like you said, like they don't disable things when they're broken, so there's some communications on a wiki that's maybe infrequently updated. So it's just not managed in a way where, it gives casual end users a lot of confidence. I feel very confident I can install ZFS, install it, get it set up, follow some simple guides, and not break things or lose data. And I'm not quite sure that's true for the average person trying to come to Btrfs and using some of the advertised features. So keep using it. I'm glad that you haven't had any problems. I'm glad that people are adopting it and that it gets more advancement, but I don't see it ever really becoming a competitor to ZFS in the same way in the enterprise storage market. Any thoughts on your side about that, Dan?
I'm biased. I'm not sure the performance cost difference between the two operating systems is very significant, because he actually said at a much lower performance cost than ZFS. I don't think that's true. I don't have anything to back it up, but I don't think that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd need some. It is really easy to run Btrfs. It is really easy, especially on Linux, because it's in the kernel and those sorts of things. So there's some like lower barriers that way. And I know people like to talk about the memory usage of ZFS, but I think there's plenty of sysctls and other options to tune that and control it. So I think for that we'd have to see some real data about like here's my constraint system, here's the same workload on both file systems, here's how they performed over X amount of time, and then maybe we could have a discussion about it. And that brings us to the final segment of today's show. That's right, it's the Roundup, the time in the show where we cover some stories we didn't have enough time in the main segment, but they're still interesting. We're still fascinated by them. Let's get into it. What do you have for us right now, Dan?
So we've got a stream of Twitter posts from a chap who used to be Unix admin for a bunch of DoD systems.
Oh, interesting.
And the government wouldn't let him make a bunch of changes to secure them. So the default configs were so bad that they were crashed without needing to be exploited. They were just bad. So out of the 50 boxes, one never had any problems. It ran perfectly without the need for intervention, unlike the others. So since he figured it was a blessed configuration, he should find out what was going on. And so he got into the box and discovered it had been compromised and was being used to distribute pirated software. They had also patched the vulns he wasn't allowed to fix. How ironic. And I remember talking about this last show about when systems are compromised, they often patch them in order to stop them from being compromised by other people. So his response was to request that the government allow their other systems to be compromised so that they could be fixed.
That's amazing.
And where was it? And basically, they had to put the server down in order to save it, is what someone else said. So that really didn't work.
No, not at all. That's funny. But sometimes, like, you're in those positions, and like you have these very ossified policies. You're just not allowed to make any kinds of changes. So it's so funny that someone else is going to do it for us, guys, and you might not like the results.
No, we're going to have to do so much testing with this new version.
Yeah, exactly. That's amazing. I'm gonna have to follow him for some more of those good stories.
Yes.
Okay. Up next, we've got Cloak and Dagger. Cloak and Dagger is a new class of potential attacks affecting Android devices. These attacks allow a malicious app to completely control the UI feedback loop and take over the device without giving the user a chance to notice the malicious activity. That sounds bad.
It seems to be these attacks require two permissions that, in case the app is installed from the Play Store, the user does not need to explicitly grant, and for which the user is not even notified. So our user study indicates that these attacks are practical. These attacks affect all recent versions of Android, including the latest, Android 7.1.2, and they are yet to be fixed.
Yikes.
So, if there doesn't seem to be any way around it, really. It just sort of happens. The possible attacks include advanced clickjacking, unconstrained keystroke recording, stealthy phishing, the silent installation of a God mode app with all permissions enabled, and silent phone unlocking plus arbitrary actions while keeping the screen off. So unlocking the phone with arbitrary actions while keeping the screen off is sort of like, let's listen to what's being said.
Yes, it is. Wow.
So they did a study with 20 human subjects and no user understood what happened. Most of these attacks are due to design issues, and to date, all these attacks are still practical. To see which versions of Android are affected and responsible disclosure, look below. And which versions are affected? It's Android 5.1, Android 6, and Android 7. And basically, they're all vulnerable. And there was a partial fix on Android 7.1.2, but it's not quite completely fixed.
Yeah, they've got some other things here, like what do they think Google should do, as well as what's Google's official reply been. Sounds like, they're trying to build some more protections into the next, into Android O, but yeah, for the moment, these things are still vulnerable. So it's good to be aware of, try to stay safe. And as always, Android is unfortunately sometimes a risky platform.
It's a great platform, but send us updates, patch it.
Patch it, exactly. Patch your S, or hopefully they'll patch their S, and then we can patch our S. I don't know, something like that. I'm confused. All right, on to the next story. A major incident at Capito Data Center. Multiple services still knackered. Still on need some 36 hours later.
Yeah, this came in to us via feedback, and someone said they work at a company. They're not allowed to say. They didn't want to tell us which company.
Naturally.
But basically, they hadn't done anything for 2 days. Just nothing they could do. So this sounds like a really big deal, especially since it includes the NHS. NHS in England is the National Health Service, which is a big deal. You don't want that going offline.
No, you do not. Those are serious social services that can really impact people. So that's unfortunate. But it does, it goes to show you we just place how much, kind of like we talked about at the top of the show, how much, we do rely on these data centers. They're very solidified things. They're like one place runs a whole bunch of services. You can have things like power outages, grid failures, or just random equipment failures that can really bring down a whole lot of operations.
Yeah, I'm getting mixed messages from this post. So one was an off-site power failure, and then they talk about a virtualization platform. Due to a technical fault in one of our data centers, some clients are experiencing issues, blah, 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 blah. But they also talk about they probably had to fly in parts from out of the country as the infrastructure is so old.
I see.
But that sounds like sour grapes, so I'm not really sure. According to rumor, there's a power failure in West Malling, and the generators failed, shutting down the whole data center.
Yikes!
So, yeah, you gotta test your power.
Test your backups. Test your redundant power supplies. Yeah. Yikes! I'll just say I'm glad I don't work there right now.
I'm glad it's not me affected by this. This would be horrible.
Exactly. Everyone be thankful to their service providers.
Yes.
All right, that brings us to the last story of today's roundup. 83% of security staff waste time fixing other IT problems. This just, I'm not even reading the article. This just sounds so plausible. A lot of people don't necessarily understand where the divisions here are. There's a lot of IT brokenness in general, but boy, that is not a great use of security researchers' time.
No. I remember working for one company that as it was being prepared to be sold, this wasn't in the past few years, as it was being prepared to be sold, they started cutting back on a lot of expenses, and they removed the people that used to come around and clean the kitchens and restock all the coffee and tea and stuff like that. And so they just said, well, we're going to take turns. The staff is going to do this, which I found incredible. You're paying people, tens of thousands of dollars a month in order to clean the kitchen. I don't really see the savings here.
Yeah, that's really not a great use of, it seems like that kind of short-sighted accounting where, yes, right now, immediately, it does save you maybe a little bit of money, but in the long run, no.
But it's the saving. They just want to get the savings on the book.
Exactly.
So that they can sell themselves off to another buyer. That was the only reason they did it.
I see.
And what was particularly a sour taste in my mouth there was the fact that they wanted people who didn't use the kitchen to clean the kitchen.
So everyone gets a hand in the chores there.
Everyone gets a hand in the chores. I didn't drink coffee or tea at that time.
Yeah. Well, then you just have to start, right? And just.
Yep. It was interesting.
That's too bad. Yeah. So these guys looks like they surveyed some organizations. 8% of professionals surveyed, helping colleagues out of 5 hours a week or more. It could be costing over $400,000. They're potentially paying qualified security professional salaries upwards of $100,000 a year and seeing up to 12.5% of that investment being spent on non-security related activities. Yikes. Yeah, it really just goes to show you, people don't really understand IT or security, and it's not getting a lot better. Hopefully this report will shed some light and, give some backbone to people who need to stand up and say, like, no, listen, these are not my responsibilities. Here's really what's important to the organization, and hopefully you can draw a line in the sand and, do what you need to do.
Your manager should be helping with that. When you say, hey, no, sorry, I can't do that because I've been asked to do this. Get a ticketing system in.
Yeah, exactly. As always, cover your own ass, document things that you do and show that your time is, being wasted or not utilized effectively, and try to make an economic argument, because that's always the most effective.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, anything else you'd like to share with our wonderful audience today?
No, that's everything.
Awesome. All right. Well, then, this has been episode 322 of the TechSNAP program, streamed live on May 31st, 2017. If you'd like to see more of our program, head on over to jupiterbroadcasting.com. There you'll find our contact page, as well as the show archives, the calendar, and the live stream. Oh, just so much good stuff. If you'd like to see even more, go to techsnap.reddit.com, or you can find us both on Twitter. I am at Wes Payne. He is at TechSnap_Dan. Stay tuned, and we'll see you next week.